First, I thought I would provide sort of a summary of what's transpired to get us to this position. So we started this activity by appointing a town manager search committee, and we met first, I think, in January, and we were also put out a proposal to hire a consulting firm to assist us with that, and we selected Municipal Resources, Inc., to help guide that process. The committee met and worked to define the profile of the kind of candidate we wanted, and then we put advertisements in various media publications to attract candidates. That began in mid-February. We attracted about 50 candidates. A number of them were from out of state. MRI, the consulting firm, worked with those resumes to condense that group from the original 50 to about 19. The search committee, in the meantime, working with MRI, tried to develop a set of essay questions that we would ask the candidates to try to help us know more about their thinking and their positions and interest in various aspects of the job. Of the 19, I believe essay questions were sent to 16, and ultimately we had 15 respondents for those essay questions. Our consultants at MRI then conducted some phone interviews, and then the search committee met on April 4th here in the townhouse to review those 15 candidates, and our discussion resulted in us coming to the conclusion that 6 of those candidates we thought would be, I don't know if the right word is semi-finalists, but would be strong candidates to pursue for the position of town manager. So they were notified, and on April 25th, the search committee met and interviewed all 6 of these candidates. And then after we conducted the interviews, the search committee conducted their own deliberations and are pleased to recommend 3 very strong candidates to the select board for their consideration. And this morning, beginning at 9 o'clock, the candidates will come in. We've set aside an hour and a half for each interview. So the way the morning will unfold is the first candidate will be in here at 9 o'clock. The order in which they came in was who's closest, who has to drive the least distance to get here. 1 at 9 o'clock, 1 at 10:30, and 1 at noon. After we finish the interviews, with the last one beginning at noon, the select board will recess for a luncheon break, and we will reconvene back in here. I don't want to say the exact time yet. We'll see how those interviews go and whether or not we're on time, but we'll set aside a certain amount of time to have lunch, and then we will come back and deliberate. And we'll return to this room for deliberation. And hopefully, if we're able, we'll be able to select a candidate to be the new town manager. However, we may not conclude our deliberations today, and we have posted a additional select board meeting at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, April 30th, which will, I believe, convene in the select board room rather than in here. I don't know for sure whether we'll need that, but if we do, that will be the process that we undertake. So that's a quick summary. What I'd like to do with the select board is, we have an agenda here. If you turn the page, I working with you, developed a set of questions. One of the things that the search committee did that I thought was helpful to the process is they had agreed on a set of questions that they were going to ask every candidate, so there would be some consistency in what we heard. And working with you, I developed these 5 questions, essentially 5 because there's one for each of us. I sent this out to you, and my apologies to Terry. I had originally assigned, just thinking who would be good for this, assigned people to each of these questions, and then I said to myself, why am I doing that? So I started to erase names and then got distracted and sent it out with some names still on it. So my screw up. We'll get back to the questions, but let me continue to go through this material. So, assuming that we are able to arrive at a decision, then the next piece you have in here is entitled Proposed Motions. At least that's the order in mine. And there are two motions that we will want to entertain subsequent to our discussions. The first is to authorize Municipal Resources, Inc. to make a conditional offer of employment to the candidate. And once that conditional offer is done, then MRI will conduct extensive background checks for us before we actually make a final decision. The second is when we have selected a candidate, we have to negotiate an actual contract. So the second motion you see there is to authorize two of us, so we do not have a quorum. And I have already asked Amy, who's the Director of Human Resources, if she would essentially be the staff for that offer to negotiate a contract. So assuming we wind up with somebody selected, those are two motions that we will need to do. And the third thing that you have in your packet is in fact the conditional offer of employment that MRI will actually use. So I will put that in there just so you would see, and you would be authorizing me to sign on behalf of the select board. Any questions about that?
Thank you.
Okay, so the way the morning is going to unfold, and before I get any further in here, I was fortunate enough to be on the Town Manager Search Committee, and there are 3 members of the search committee here. I just want to thank them profusely for all the hard work and the very thorough job they did reviewing material for the candidates and then conducting the interviews. I think we were from 7:30 Thursday morning until about 4 o'clock Thursday. It was a very productive session. But the committee was terrific, very thoughtful about all their deliberations. I just, on behalf of the select board and the town, we wouldn't be in a position to do what we're going to do today if it hadn't been for the hard work of the search committee. And I would also want to thank our friends at MRI for all the work that they did to help guide us through the process. They've done this a lot. We've not done this a lot, or haven't done it for a very long time. So that was greatly, Buzz and Bob who are here today, greatly appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, Amy, who was the staff for the search committee, provided us guidance and kept us on track and did a whole lot of things. So Amy, absolutely thanks to you. Buzz, Bob, thanks to you, and to the search committee. I'm grateful to you for all the hard work that you did. So what I would like to do now is come back to these questions. And the one you have, I have in fact wiped out everybody's name. There's no names on this one. So what was really effective, I think, about the search committee on Thursday is we had a set of 5 questions. No, we had 6 actually. We had a set of 6 questions. I must say that I was a little bit surprised. I thought 6 questions, we had an hour for each candidate. I thought those 6 questions would blow the complete hour, and but it didn't. And the reason for telling you that is many of you had suggestions for additional questions that we would want to ask the candidates. There was going to be ample time. I would say we probably had 5 or 6, maybe even more questions that were not part of the original 6 set for each of the candidates. And they were really good questions because you could tee off the questions we had and the candidates' responses to go a little bit deeper if you needed more information. So I think these 6 questions will work. What I did to start each of the interviews last time, just to settle everybody down, was just sort of ask each candidate if they would tell us a little about themselves that we wouldn't find in the resume. And I thought that was a pretty simple, easy way to get going. And then we just went through our questions. We are in open session, as you know, and we'll be in open session for the entire deliberation to find a new town manager. After we have reviewed the material and we've had our break and we come back to deliberate, I'm taking a page out of the search committee's process that we used on Thursday. We had 6 candidates to try to sort our way through. I thought that was going to be a very hard process. It wasn't that it was easy, but I thought it was going to really be hard. And what we did that helped us with that process is right at the very beginning, we took sort of a straw poll of who did we think, if we were going to recommend three candidates to the select board, who did we think would be the 3 candidates? And everybody had 3 votes, and we just voted, and we wrote down. And I don't know whether it was lucky for us or whatever, but it broke fairly nicely. There seemed to be 3 candidates, which you see in front of you, which had a significant number of votes, and 3 candidates who didn't. So I think I'd like to use that process again today. It's a straw vote. It's not going to mean anything, but it might guide us. The other thing I would say is that we are in open session. So when we come to discussing the candidates individually, I think we need to be very mindful of that and to try to keep our comments focused on the attributes of the candidates that will be important about what we want in a town manager, and to try to keep it focused on their skills, their capabilities, or attributes. So we can do this in a positive manner to the best we can. And that's all I really have to say. And we'll take it as it comes, and we'll see how it works, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this process. Questions? Okay, let's go to the questions then and see if we can assign folks. And again, the search committee, and I thought it worked well, if you're assigned a question, you ask it of all 3 candidates, and that way you get consistency of the question from the same voice. Mr. Verrill is here, Ms. Whitfield is here. They were people who asked questions, and I thought that worked fairly well. So volunteers, I mean, I started to assign these, and I thought that was kind of dumb, so.
I volunteer for the first one.
Okay.
You want to take that as chair?
I'm sorry?
Unless you think you should take that as chair.
Nope, I don't think anything. I'm thinkless. Great.
Well, I suggested question number 3, so I was hoping to have that one. However, the way you assigned it was also fine, so I'm
Your side, question 3, is that what you said there?
yes.
Consider yourself
All right.
selected.
I'm happy to do number 2 or.
Okay, Linda?
And I'll take number 4. That was an easy.
Nobody wants number 5.
Can I get number 5, I guess, all right? Okay. Now, when you're asking follow-up questions, you are not restricted to exactly following up the question that was asked, but try not to get in the space of subsequent questions. So there's a question down there about, number 3 is about hiring employees. So if Susan asks a question about why should you be the next town manager, let's not follow up with a question saying one of the important things is hiring people. How do you think about that?
Right.
Try not to do that. But, one chuckles, but it has happened.
What if that's part of their answer, is the question?
Well, that's fine.
Right.
But again, just leave it because we know it's going to come up,
Right.
right?
And what about other questions? First we go through these 5, and then if there's time, then we do other things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are follow-up questions to these 5 as they come along, and again, loosely defined follow-up. Just don't go wandering into somebody else's space. And then when we're done, if you've got a question, ask away, right? And if you think it's a discriminating question, an important question, not just related to candidate A because he or she said something, you might want to think about following up with that question with subsequent candidates. If you thought it was an important question, I think I asked yesterday, a follow-up question about what they thought was I think it was something to do with the long-range plan, what they thought was the most important thing in the long-range plan. That was pretty discriminating, because a couple of people said, well, I haven't had much chance to look at that yet. So, and then I continued to ask that question as we were going along. Okay?
So, as you said, there was ample time after, even with the follow-up questions for these questions, you felt there was ample time for subsequent questions?
Absolutely. I don't think we were early. I don't think, maybe one person took almost an hour, but I think most everybody took 40 minutes. I'm looking at the search committee for something like that, but it was not, we didn't go, oh my gosh, the hour's up and now what are we going to do? We were ahead of schedule the whole time. I don't know if that'll happen here. I've got no idea, but I think we moved this. Terry had suggested, in fact, we can go from an hour to an hour and a half. I think given that additional half an hour from what I saw yesterday, we've got plenty of time to ask. And please ask them. This is an important decision for the town, and we want to try our best to make sure we get it right. Luckily, the search committee gave us 3 really good candidates, so. Okay, any other questions? Are there any comments from the audience? I would say to the audience, the candidate will be looking at us and answering questions to us. We are the folks, fortunately or unfortunately, who have to make this decision. We're not going to take questions from the audience, but we're glad you're here, and thank you very much for coming. And if there are questions now about process, I'd be happy to entertain them. Yes, Ruth. This is Ruth Lauer, Kai's Road.
Thank you. And that's exactly what my point is. Yeah, I'm having a difficult time hearing you speaking softly to us.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's something we can do with the volume so that...
Well, I think there's a volume control in there. I don't know who's in the minute. That wasn't funny.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
A little too much on the dial. I think that's pretty good. Yes, you can hear?
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Maybe, could you move your mic a little closer to you, maybe?
Could,
No.
but it would get in the way of my little notebook here.
I don't know if
Is that any better? Okay. All right. So, any other comments or questions? All right, well, we have a full 10 minutes before the first candidate is supposed to be here. And that candidate is Kerry Lafleur, the current finance director and treasurer of the town. So we look forward to seeing Kerry in 10 minutes, and I don't know, whether we just tap dance for...
So I had a question in terms of the interview questions that have already gone on.
Uh-huh.
Since you've already had these questions, should we consider those having been asked, or if any of them feel like something we should
They were asked.
include?
All of them were asked to each candidate.
Right.
If you want to hear the answer to any of those questions, ask away.
Okay.
And there were good questions. There was
Yeah.
a lot of thought going into the questions, and I think perhaps the only exception to that would be question number 1, because we kind of got the same. We don't have, that question had to do with tell us about the arc of your career and then why you should be the next town manager. And our question number 1 is tell us about your understanding of the job and why you should be the
Right.
next town. So I don't think we need to worry about that. But the other questions really tried to get at,
Right.
there's a question of sustainability.
Exactly.
I would say it provoked very diverse answers. There was a question about what long-term and short-term goals or problems the town might encounter. Again, I thought it was discriminating. We got quite a variety of, so there were a lot of very good questions. So feel free.
Okay.
Feel free. And I know I sent you, I didn't put it in part of the packet, but MRI had provided us with a list, I think, of like 39 questions, from which we crafted these search committee questions and then crafted these. So if you find something on that list, go for it.
I found that list of questions really helpful, and I'm really excited to be interviewing these candidates. I think the search committee and MRI did a super job, and I want to thank everybody.
And our first candidate is here, so I think what we could do, is that legal? I mean, is that appropriate to, in open session, to start earlier than we said we were going to?
Seems like we should seize the moment.
Yeah. It's not posted that there are.
No, the times are not
Times are not
posted.
posted.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Thank you.
Candidates were online. The official meeting posting just said 8:30. On the town manager search committee website, it did say what time each candidate would be at.
But not on the formal agenda.
Not on the formal agenda, not on the.
So I think we can go ahead then. So I'll wait for, Dina just stepped out, so I'll wait for her to come back. And then, Amy, would you invite Kerry to join us then?
Select Board, I'd like to introduce you to Kerry Lafleur.
Lafleur. You look familiar.
Good morning.
Well, Kerry, welcome. We're delighted to hear and delighted to have you here, and congratulations on being asked to be a finalist for the position. Similar to what we did on Thursday, the Select Board has a number of questions that they would like to ask you. I thought I would start out similarly to the way we did on Thursday. If you could just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and your career for the audience and the folks at home. And then we'll begin with, the first question will come from Susan Bates. So please.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm thrilled to be here. I have to get used to that microphone. It's, the sound system is good in this room today. So I am currently the finance director for the town of Concord, as you know. I've been here for about 2.5 years now. I work with 5 committees on a regular basis and work with a number of other committees from time to time. So I know a lot of people in town, but not everybody. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've worked in local government for 28 years now. I have a master's degree in public administration from Rutgers University that I obtained a very long time ago. I have worked as a town manager, an assistant town manager, or finance director my entire career. I would say probably about half and half in management and half in finance. Prior to coming to Concord, I was the town manager for the town of Lunenburg for about 9 years. Lunenburg is a smaller community with a smaller organization, but it provides an awful lot of services, so it's not completely unlike the town of Concord. I've worked in 5 different states in a number of communities. I've worked in, obviously here and in Massachusetts since 1999 in communities that have town meeting form of government. I've also worked in council manager form of government, so I'm pretty experienced in the, across the board in the types of governmental entities that municipalities operate underneath. Okay.
Good morning, Kerry.
Good morning.
Tell us about your understanding of the job and why you think you'd be the best candidate for town manager of Concord.
So I think I am the best candidate for 2 reasons. I have an awful lot of experience in municipal government. I have been a town manager before, not a town administrator or an executive secretary, and there's definitely a difference in the roles and responsibilities. So I'm very familiar with everything that the position entails, and I've done, with the exception of the breadth of appointing, committee appointment authority that the town manager in Concord has, with the exception of that, because I have, in other communities, had a more limited role in appointing residents to committees. But I certainly understand the process and the thought process you would go through there. I've done all of this, and not for a few years. I've done it for a long time. But I think I'm also the best candidate because I'm here, I'm working here, I understand the community. I haven't been here so long that I'm completely entrenched in we have to continue to do things the way that we've always done them, but I have an understanding and an appreciation for the traditions of the town and what works here. And so I think for those reasons, I am the best candidate here today.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about, I understand what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about Concord that makes you attracted to
And they only come up once every 26 years, right? So I know when I went through the process, I was certainly asked by your consultants that question too. And obviously there's a bit of these jobs only come up when they come up, right? It was the same thing when I came here as the finance director, and that position had been held for longer than 26 years. And so there's something about you have to be ready to make an evaluation about an opportunity when they arise. The reason I came here to begin with is the community that I was in. I loved working in Lunenburg. I loved all of the aspects of that job. It was a wonderful first step back into management for me, because in that position I was also the finance director and the human resources director, and I wore a number of different hats. But I like everything about how municipalities work, and I think you either like it or you hate it, and if you hate it, please go do something different, because you can't be anything but 100% committed to a job like this and understanding the process. One of the things, it's a puzzle to me. I love the fact that it is a puzzle. And you just never know. You go into town meeting and you prepare for a presentation, and you think, I've thought of every possible question that can come up, and doesn't somebody throw you something out of left field? And if you don't look at it as, wow, this is a challenge, how can I answer that question? If you can't look at it that way, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. So what is it about Concord? I think on the outside, I love the fact that you have a light plant, as crazy as that is, but you have no reason to have followed what happened in Lunenburg in the last decade or so, but there were so many issues with the electric supply company, and the town at one point investigated the ability to have its own municipal utility, and you certainly can't do that in this day and age. But I loved the fact that you had a municipal utility and you had control over that, and the ability to bring forward whatever green initiatives you wanted to through that utility. I think as I got here, I love the commitment the community has to being socially responsible, and being in this business for 28 years. You want to make a difference. You get into it and you realize it's not that easy to make a difference. And then you're places where people want to make a difference, but it's hard because you don't have the resources to make the difference. And here we have the resources, and I don't just mean financial resources, but we have a large group of of citizens that want to make a difference, and I want to be a part of that.
Thank you.
If I,
Sure.
you mentioned that you've been here for 2 years and appreciate Concord, but you're not necessarily, and I don't want to put my words in your mouth. You said something about not being afraid to make some changes. Obviously, this position is following in a very long-held town manager's tenure. Can you expand a little bit on how you would, what changes you would, or how you would approach making changes in a sort of stable of
Yeah.
longevity?
So, it's not just in the town manager's office that there is a lot of tenure in the community. I mean, in the organization. It's across the board. And that is wonderful in regard to the fact that you have this institutional knowledge that you can't replace. It's so hard to replace that. But I think the flip side of that is when you don't have turnover, you're not looking at things with a different set of eyes. And even if you're trying to do that, you're not, what you're seeing is based on the history. So it's hard to make change. And then as new people come in, and I see this, it's hard for them to understand why you're doing things the way that you're doing them. And, but when you're here and you're doing them, you understand them. And so that's really difficult. I think what I've talked about with my staff and other people that will listen to me over the last couple of years is really the same thing that's in the comprehensive long-range plan, where it's the systems model. And I think that systems model, where you're looking at everything from a multitude of facets inside of the organization, I think we have to start doing that. So one thing that I would love to do is to utilize the talent that we have up and down the organization and say, okay, 75% of your job is task-oriented, or whatever the percentages are, but 25% of it is systems-oriented in positioning yourself to be able to implement change. And it's a different thought process, it's a different mindset, and I think where we, now when we've got a change that we need to make, we're immediately moving from task to implementation. And maybe we're working with people to implement that we didn't work with before, and we don't really know them, we don't really understand what they're bringing to the table, and we're losing something. And so I would love to just start transitioning the organization to freeing up a portion of people's time up and down the organization to start working in teams to be able to implement. And that's...
Great.
I have a follow-up to that. That's very interesting, and it relates to something that caught my eye in your cover letter, where you say you're a person who challenges the status quo by always wondering if the way we're doing things is the best and most effective way. Can you give some examples in your career of how you challenged the status quo, what you did?
I think I'm always thinking, certainly anytime there's a vacancy, a staff vacancy, I'm always trying to figure out, are we going to replace this position as is, or are we going to change it to better serve the needs of the organization? And if we're going to change it, what ripple effect would that have? So I'm always thinking in those terms. I think the biggest example I could provide, and it's something that I talked about perhaps in my cover letter, if not there, in the essay responses, is the regional dispatch that the town of Lunenburg, Lancaster, Devens, and Harvard were involved in. That was something that really was revolutionary. Regionalization is not something that's very common in Massachusetts, probably not in New England. I have the benefit of working in 3 different states outside of New England where regionalization is something that is done on a regular basis. And so, I don't want to take up a ton of your time going through that process, but just bringing that idea through the process, through the organization, and addressing the issues that the staff had before we even were able to bring that publicly and then go through that process. I think that's a good example of a successful reorganization, and it's something I'm always thinking of, because I always want to improve upon the way things are being done.
Thank you. Any other follow-up questions? Linda?
Yeah, Kerry, I want to ask you about, in terms of transitioning staff to take on a different lens in terms of their daily operations. We have very strong department heads, as you well know, and many of them they've been here a long time. They've been given a great deal of independence in crafting their departments to get the job done that needs to get done. How do you see yourself working in partnership with them for whatever change it is that you want to institute?
So I would agree. We have a number of extremely talented department heads and employees throughout the organization. And I think they all do a very good job at meeting their daily missions and their weekly missions. So I would not be, there's nothing that I see, having been here for 2.5 years, that would need to change. I think what I would bring to the table is making sure that everybody is really conscious of the decisions they're making within their own departments and how they are impacting other departments. And I'm not saying that's not being done now. Obviously, in my role, I'm not privy to the conversations that the town manager is having with all of the department heads, but that is something that would be very important to me, because I think we need to move to more of a systems approach to addressing the problems that we have. We can't just be looking at, I have an issue in my department that needs to be addressed. What's going to work the best for my department? And so I would be asking questions to make sure that people are always thinking that in addition to what's best for your department, we have to be considering what's best for the organization as a whole.
I think you're up for question number 2.
Okay. Well, you're already addressing part of our next question, which is, what do you know about our community? And from your perspective, what do you see as its strengths, weaknesses, and unique characteristics? And also, how do your skills and experiences apply to that?
So in terms of strengths, I think I probably already touched upon this. I think the engagement, the level of engagement of the community is much higher than what I've experienced in other communities. I know when I started here, I don't hear this so much anymore, but it was interesting when I started. I'd hear people talk about how hard it was to get people to participate in committees and be interested in committees, and we have a lot of committees here, a lot more than a lot of communities with relatively few vacancies. So it was funny, and I think maybe I'm not hearing that so much after being here for so long, but it was funny to hear that, because the level of engagement in this community is very high. It's very strong. I think the center and the West Concord Center, the fact that there are so many small businesses and it's so vibrant, and I know that the merchants don't necessarily feel the same because it's a difficult environment that we're operating in. But I think those are assets. The historical components of the community are assets. In terms of weaknesses, it's really the capital planning. I'm amazed, and I talked about this a little bit on Thursday, I'm amazed that we are where we are in terms of the need for so many large capital improvements. And it is going to be difficult to pull all of that together, but it's not impossible. And I know that together we can do that, but the fact that there are so many capital needs and the dollars that are associated with them, and the fact that we don't necessarily have a good handle on what the estimated costs are for some of those, that's going to be a struggle. In terms of where my experience benefits, I didn't start out thinking I would be involved in the financial side of municipal government, but I gravitated toward that both out of interest and need in the communities I've served in. I can help with that. I can help put that plan together, and I think we can put together a very good plan. I'm comfortable with that. I love doing that, and I can help with that.
Kerry, if I can follow up, you already referenced the high level of town engagement, both through our town committees and boards, as well as outside of those town committees and boards. Some groups are well organized and represented, others less so. And I'm curious about how you would seek out often underrepresented viewpoints in town on issues that affect a sizable number of people, and how you typically respond to pressures that are brought to bear would be, as the town manager, placed on you by influential individuals and groups in town.
Okay. I am here, I'm working, I know a lot of people, I work with a lot of committees. I don't know everybody, and I don't work with every committee. I have I think a reasonable sense of coalitions and which ones have good representation and loud voices, and a reasonable idea of which ones don't. So I think to begin, I would have to really review, what is outstanding at this point in time, to get a sense of where I needed to start looking for things that I'm not aware of. And I think that is in talking to all of you individually, collectively, talking to other existing committee members or people in the community that have been involved in the past and may no longer be involved, to understand where I would need to go to get information that I didn't have. I think it's an evolving process. It's hard to say right now without knowing everything exactly what I would do, other than I would be actively seeking out opportunities to listen to what people had to say. I am somebody I'm open to speaking to anybody. I think I'm very approachable. I've had other people tell me that I'm approachable. If anybody wants to work with me, I want to work with them. Just by way of an example, in the town of Lunenburg, they recently built a middle school, high school. That project went from start to finish while I was there. It came after 2 regionalization efforts where the community was required by the MSBA to look at different regional opportunities. Neither one of those were successful. The town decided to move ahead to build its own middle school, high school. This was a huge project, in a community that is very fiscally conservative. And even though there was assistance from MSBA, it was going to be a big impact. There was a gentleman who came to every town meeting, and he was the voice of we're not spending any money, and I loved him because he would get up in a room of 500 people and he would speak what nobody else had the courage to speak. He came to a forum, he asked a bunch of questions, we didn't have the answers. I went up to him after and I said, Clarence, his name, I will get you those answers. I would like to work with you. Anytime you have a question, you call me and I'll give you the information. And he ended up, I think he got that project approved in town because he wasn't expecting to, I guess, have the voice and the impact, but he went around and he then educated people. And he said, you know what, you can call the town manager. She'll answer your questions. And I think that's how you get done, and I feel like I've gotten completely off track here. But that's the kind of person that I am. I don't shy away from people. I'm not going to shy away from somebody who doesn't agree with me, somebody who's criticized me at a meeting. I'm going to seek them out to the extent that they're comfortable with that and try to engage them in a process.
Great, thank you. Any other follow-up questions? Terry, I think you're up then.
Okay. So, what are the 3 most important qualities that you seek when hiring a town employee, and how do you ensure that the applicant has them?
The 3 most important qualities. I think I want to know that the person wants to work in the organization. And it doesn't matter to me if they want to work here for 2 years, 5 years, or the rest of their career. I want them to want to be working here. It's not just a job. And really, this is at any level. I'm not just talking about a department head or a division manager that's going to have to put in all kinds of time and go to evening meetings. This is my senior account clerk that's on the front counter downstairs. I want to know that they understand the organization and they want to work here. I want to know that they are honest. And I want to know that they're dependable. I guess those would be the 3 qualities. How do I go about ascertaining that they have those qualities? I think that depends on the position that you're advertising for. I always make sure we're bringing people in at least 2 times, even if we're talking about the first line person, because I can't tell you how many times I've brought somebody in a second time and thought, oh my goodness, you're not who I met the last time. So that's important to me. Checking references obviously is something that's important, both the ones that they're listing on their resume or in their application, and people you know in the organization where they've worked, or I think that's important as well. And then I always like some sort of aptitude test. I think it's important to be able to test people's skills, not just what they're telling you, but that you're actually seeing it demonstrated in whatever manner is appropriate for the position you're hiring for.
Okay, and the next part of this question is, what is your collective bargaining experience, and how do you develop your strategy for collective bargaining?
My collective bargaining experience is extensive. And I think it depends on what the charter says in terms of who is setting the tone. So my experience has been that it was the select board that was responsible ultimately for accepting the contract, and so the way I went about it is I would meet with the select board in advance, let them know we're working on this contract, these are the issues that I see, do you have anything that you would like accomplished through this? You know, what are the parameters that you're giving me to negotiate? I originally started negotiating without an attorney. When I was in Lunenburg, I did not use labor counsel. And I went through the first round with 5 different contracts without labor counsel. And then I went back to the board the next go-round and I said, you know what, I think it might make sense to have labor counsel there. Both in terms of some of the issues were in some of the contracts very technical, and you obviously don't want to make a mistake. A lot of times the union is represented by an attorney or somebody, a business manager that's their job. And I found in doing that, the board in this instance said, okay, things went a lot quicker. They were a lot smoother. I think we got down to business a lot faster, and it was overall a more pleasant experience. I know here it's very typical to use labor counsel. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I've, in negotiations, I've done just a lot over 9 years with 5 different groups. You get into a lot of issues, both in, you know, renegotiating the 3-year contract to interim bargaining to, you know, impact bargaining. I've done a lot with police, fire, with AFSCME, with the Teamsters, with dispatchers, when we had dispatchers in Lunenburg. I think I've worked with every different group that you come across in Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you. And the last part, or kind of a follow-up, well, you've talked a little bit about how you would encourage teamwork and working between departments, between silos. So if you want to say anything else about that, and how do you deal with an employee who's not a team player?
So I think it's going to be very important to develop cross-divisional, cross-departmental teams. And I don't have that completely figured out right now, but I'm definitely interested in pursuing that. If I could just step back for a moment. As an employer, the town faces the same employment issues as any other employer. There aren't a lot of people flocking to work in municipal government, and we're going to have to do something about that to get people excited about working in municipal government, or else we're not going to have people to carry out these services. And I think one of the reasons why people aren't interested in it is because we're so task-oriented, or we have a whole segment of the organization that is task-oriented, and then we have very few people who are working in more creative aspects of advancing the organization. And I think one way we get people excited about working in municipal government is to open that opportunity to everybody at every level. There are the administrative assistants in departments, they know how to do things, they know how to solve problems that we have, and we need to be making sure we're asking them and involving them. So I think there is a tension that builds up when the vast majority of your organization is task-oriented, and then there are other people that are working, a very small group that are working in what looks like fun work. It's more fun, and we need to involve everybody in that. And I think in terms of, you know, I think I would want to open that opportunity to everybody. I know some people would immediately jump on that. some people are going to need a little push. Some people you're going to identify as people you want involved in this, and they're going to need a little push. And then some people are not going to want to be involved. And I would be okay initially to have those three groups of people, and let the people who maybe you're identifying they're not team players because they don't want to be involved in this new concept. Let them, maybe it's because they're unsure. Let them see how it works, and be on a slower path. And I think eventually, most people are going to get where you want them to be.
Given that description and your interest in it, have you, in your tenure as finance manager or as in working for Concord, have you taken any steps in your own department to do that?
I would say yes, and probably the best example would be with the implementation of the NISC software at the light plant. So the light plant is bringing in a new enterprise solution to their operation. It is completely different than what we are using right now for financial software, with very limited ability to integrate, because the financial software that the town is using as a whole it's limited. It needs to be replaced at some point in the near future, likely, unless we can get that vendor to completely overhaul the system. But this is very difficult for my existing staff, because they feel, right or wrong, because this decision happened really before I started working here, even though it's just sort of grown its legs and started moving since I've been here. They don't feel that they were involved in the decision-making process. They're concerned that the decisions that are being made are going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to carry out their mission in terms of financial accountability for the community. So what we have done is, I have 2 staff members, and I'm really not involved in this process. I have empowered them to be the representatives for the finance department in this implementation. And it's been very interesting, because this has gone on for a long period of time now, where they would initially, and these are people that I trust, they know their business better than I know their business. They know how decisions are impacting them and their staffs better than I do. But it's been interesting, because they started going to these meetings and coming back, and okay, this is what we talked about, here's a decision that needs to be made, you make this decision. And I said, okay, let's talk about this. I'm comfortable with you making this decision. And we've gone through this evolution, and it's not just them thinking they need to bring everything back to me, it's other members of this team from other departments thinking, you can't possibly have the authority to make this decision. And so it's been a great learning process on a very large scale project, and one that it's been hard. We've had to bring in some external resources. We actually have a consulting auditor to talk through some of these things, because we know at the end of the day they're going to run their own standalone system, and maybe we're making 2 journal entries into our system, and all of the detail of what's going on is going to reside with them. But we have an auditor who is somebody other than our existing auditor saying, you know what, that's okay, and it's okay for these reasons. And maybe it's not, in an ideal world we would all be using the same system, but it didn't happen that way. And we can't be the reason that this project can't go forward. And so we've had to learn to, what can we control, what can't we control? What are we going to dig our heels in? What are we going to say, you know what, it's not how we would do it, but it's going to work.
Yes, Linda?
One follow-up. I'd like to go back to your discussion about negotiating experience and ask you, what was the greatest challenge you faced in that process, and how you went about addressing it, and what the resolution was?
I think the greatest challenge in any negotiating process is you can never, or you probably shouldn't, the expectation employees have in terms of salary and benefits, you can't ever meet that. And it is hard. I had an experience where, I want to say it was back in fiscal 12, where state aid was cut towards in the last quarter, or at the beginning of the last quarter of the fiscal year. There wasn't any way we could absorb that without making serious reductions. And in the end, we decided we needed to do a furlough. We looked at whether or not laying off somebody would make sense. It was a very small organization. There wasn't any way to do that. We needed to furlough, and when we could only furlough the departments we could furlough. We couldn't furlough public safety. We couldn't furlough the school because we couldn't tell them that they needed to do that. Have their own budgetary authority. But I called all of the employees in. I explained the situation. At that point, at the outset, I had said, well, we do have the opportunity either to lay somebody off or to furlough. And we talked it through, and people weren't excited about a furlough, but they were involved in the process, the general agreement, okay, we have to do this. And some were more actively involved in the implementation than others. But the hardest thing has to be not being able to meet expectations in terms of salary and benefits, because everybody, or most people, think they're worth more than what they're getting. And it doesn't matter if I think they're worth more, the community thinks they're worth more. I think everybody thinks people are worth more, but you have to balance that with the ability to pay. So I guess the way that I go about that is talking about, what are improvements that can be made that cost little or no money. I think people often forget the fact that they have the resources they need to get their job done. And I'm just talking about when you're across the table, across the bargaining table, because I don't think they forget it on a day-to-day basis, but when you're across the bargaining table, all you're thinking about is you want more and I have less. But reminding them, in the last community I was in with public safety, I would remind them, we have a state-of-the-art building. We have a beautiful building. We, every year, are replacing police vehicles. When we need to replace fire engines and ambulances, we replace that. You have the equipment that you need. You have training that you need. We make additional training available to you. And you have to assign something to that. You can't just say that means nothing. And so I guess that's what I would go to when you can't quite meet the pay expectation.
Jen?
I think it's my turn. And some of this was, you've related to the long-range plan and other answers, but this is specific. Concord has just completed its long-range plan, Envision Concord. Can you share with us your impression on the plan, its goals, and the task of implementation?
So I was looking at it again last night. I was not a member of the Long-Range Planning Committee. One of my staff members was. am definitely aware of the process, the work of the committee to bring that process from start to finish. Members of that committee presented at the Finance Committee, so I'm definitely aware of that. I took another look at it last night and thought, wow, it's great. It's even better than I remember it, and I think, you know, because I'm looking at it in a different lens, there's so much in that document, and I don't know how you can do anything other than feel excited about what's in there. As I was looking through it last night again and thinking, okay, if you're fortunate enough to be offered the opportunity to be the town manager, you're going to have a big role in this. I think the first thing that needs to be done on an internal organization level is put together an implementation team. You know, there are a lot of tasks identified, a lot of very specific tasks and timelines associated with that, and I would want to put together a team that, you know what, 25% of your job is implementing this plan. And it's, you know, with representation from planning and land management, finance, the town manager's office. We don't really have, it'd be nice if we had a housing planner and a transportation planner. We don't have those yet, so I would have to figure out who might be the representatives of those roles. But I think there needs to be a team in-house that is going to make sure that what's in that plan gets implemented. And not that they're going to do it, but they're going to make sure that committees are working on, or are reminded, you know, you need to be working, this is your task, you need to be working on this, or bringing all of that together, making sure that those elements that are identified are actually being implemented, because there's a lot of really exciting things in there, and a lot of things that could be done relatively easily, and other things that we need to be planning for. And I guess I'll stop there.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So the board right now, as you may or may not know, is in the process of trying to get its arms around this long-range plan. I mean, to me, sometimes when I read it, it seems sort of overwhelming. Exciting, yes, I get that, but sometimes when I'm spending time with it, at the end of that time, I'm
Taking a nap.
Yeah. So we're in the process of trying to take a look at that and try to develop some priorities. What are the things we really want to see happen right now, and what are things that are important to do, but they're just going to wait? So, but if you were the new town manager, having read and spent some time with the report, what is, and this is, there's no particular right answer here, but what sort of struck you as the thing or the issue that you would say, boy, I can't wait to get my hands on that? That just is right up my alley, or something I've always had an interest in. What is it in that long-range plan that would really excite you as a new town manager?
So I think the first time that I looked at it, what really excited me was the affordable housing issue. That's something that was really important to me as a young person. I think I've probably mentioned in the materials you have. I wrote my master's thesis on affordable housing, thinking I was going to solve that issue. And almost 30 years later, it honestly doesn't look any different to me, or significantly different. But as I was looking at the document last night, again, I think and I don't have a ton of experience here, but what jumped out at me are the vast number of opportunities we have to coordinate tourism for visitors coming to the community to get people excited about what goes on here in Concord, what's available here, and to help the business community. And there were so many things that could be implemented relatively easily at small dollars or no dollars, that could have such an immediate impact on the community. And again, that's not my background. I don't have that background. We're fortunate. Our deputy town manager is amazing at that. That's something she's very passionate about and very, very well versed there. So I would be lucky that that's something that she could do. But I just was struck at the things that we could do, and that would give us the time to be working on these issues, affordable housing, that we're not going to solve in the next couple of years. The transportation issues, there were some immediate things that I think that we could do, but there are other things that we're not going to solve that in the next couple of years. But I think to be able to give the community some wins, to keep people excited about continuing to make improvements, those are the things that really struck me.
Thank you. Other follow-ups on this? Well, I have one more follow-up, only because it hasn't come up yet.
Yeah.
And that is that another substantial, affordable housing, I understand that, and as you know, at the last town meeting, we tried to take some steps in that direction. But the one thing you haven't mentioned that I think is increasingly important in town is around the whole issue of sustainability. Yeah. And I mean that as broadly as we can. So what is your take or perspective on how the town is approaching this issue and where you think we might be able to go?
Yeah. So I think sustainability, fiscal sustainability, environmental sustainability. In terms of environmental sustainability, I know there are a number of people in town, constituencies in town that are very in tune with that part of sustainability. I feel like there probably are a lot of people who feel overwhelmed by sustainability and what can I possibly do to make a positive impact. And I feel like I'm one of those people. I wish I was more knowledgeable in that area because I'm interested, but it's overwhelming. And I think the important thing is to help people who, not to stop what people who are very advanced and very aware of this, not to stop what they're doing, but to help people who are overwhelmed by this to understand what they can do to have a positive impact. And I think at every opportunity, you identify what's that one thing, or what are those two things that people can do, and at every opportunity possible, you're talking about those one or two things, so that people are hearing the same message over and over. And what are those few things that everybody can do to make a positive impact? We went through the issue with we need more parking at the high school, or there is a constituency that believes we need more parking at the high school. And obviously, if you create more parking, the cars will come, right? And the cars are one of the largest problems. And as a parent of high schoolers that drive, boy, I don't know what I would do if my son didn't drive my daughter to and from every place she needed to go. By him being able to do that, it allows me to not spend time during my day thinking about how my kids are going to get from A to B. And I used to spend a lot of time thinking about that. I don't feel great that, you know, by making my life easier, I'm causing a problem for somebody else. But it's hard to resolve that issue or to not be contributing to that problem when we haven't solved transportation issues. My kids don't not ride the bus because it's not cool. My kids didn't want to ride the bus, and they ride the bus at every opportunity. But that's not possible, and I don't need to go into why that's not possible. But, you know, we have transportation issues that need to be resolved. So what are the one or two things that, you know what, I can't give up my car? What can I do? What's something else that I can do so that, you know, at some point when I can take that action, I'll do it. But what can I do in the meantime to help? And I think we need to help identify those things because everybody wants to participate. Everybody wants to help solve the problem. We just all have a different ability to do that. So let's help people figure out how they can contribute and feel good about what they can do at this point in their life, given what's going on in their own household.
I have another one.
Okay.
So the long-range plan, this is not fair to the long-range plan, but essentially says, here's some stuff we should be doing. We should be paying attention to this. We should be doing more in sustainability. We should be doing more in affordable housing, whatever it happens to be. So those are things that we as a community think are important and we want to tackle. So I'm sort of flip it around a little bit and ask, that's really good, but what are the things that are going to come at us that we're going to have to tackle, as opposed to the things we want to tackle to move? So if you look at, you're now the new town manager, we've got this implementation team in place, working on sustainability and, affordable housing and all the other important things in that document. But tomorrow there's going to be something coming right at us that we're going to have to solve. So what do you see as those things that are things we're going to have to tackle as a town, whether we sort of like it or not?
So what you're going to have to tackle is the $90 million middle school. It's the needs in public safety, public works, potentially municipal office buildings. So I think that over the next year, the 12 months or 18 months, while we are in the process of putting together a middle school feasibility study and schematic design, we need to get serious about identifying what are the other capital needs that we have. And I don't know if it's a task force, it's a committee, it's, you know, it's whatever. It's residents and staff members identifying what are those needs, what is a realistic timetable, what is an estimated cost. I know we have costs floating out there right now, but I can tell you that those were developed between a 30-minute conversation with the town manager and myself, because we needed to put together some sort of model. And when we put it out there, it was, you know, this is for illustration purposes. So, you know, we're not talking about $10 million, we're talking about $100 million. But it doesn't mean that those numbers that are out there are accurate, because they're not based on a lot of data. But we need, over the next 12 to 18 months, we need to have good data, and we need to recognize that we have these needs. They are going to have to be met, and how are we going to tackle that? And I think it's, you know, in my opinion, for what it's worth, the middle school is the first project. I understand that. The middle school's been talked about for a very long period of time. It needs to go forward. The municipal offices. I think the way that we could address the fact that we're in, I think, 15 different buildings is through better technology. So I think the near term is the middle school. The end of the line are municipal buildings. And in between, we have a public safety and public works facilities that we need to address. But I think we need to be ready to bring forward to the community at the appropriate time before the middle school project is authorized, a package that says, here's what needs to be done, here's a suggested timetable, and get some sort of buy-in that this is the path that we're following for the next 20 years, understanding we can't make commitments for residents, but have a general understanding that this is what we need to be doing. And, you know, if it's the middle school project in 2 years, and maybe it's another project in 6 years, so in year 5, we're not going to bring forward the fact that we want a concert hall, or we want an indoor ice rink, or something that we haven't talked about. Because we have to be able to address these capital needs, because they're definitely having an impact on the operations. Now, that doesn't mean, you know what, if some building becomes available and it would be completely suitable to consolidate all the administrative offices, that we wouldn't look at that opportunity, but it would be looked at in the context of, you know what, we didn't plan for this. So if we want to do this, what are we going to offload to make this happen?
Well, thank you. You mentioned capital planning when you addressed the strengths and weaknesses. I think Linda asked that question. Is there another? So capital planning, I get it. How we attack that, more conversation needs to take place. Is there something else that's going to come at us?
I think something else that could come at us in terms of environmental sustainability would be changes in regulations, or new regulations that might require us to move forward faster than the path that we're on, or, you know, in a manner that's something other than what we're thinking of right now.
Okay. So the question that I want to ask you is kind of an odd question, but you were with us on Thursday with the search committee, and you've been with us here for now the better part of an hour. What's the one question you hoped you wouldn't get asked? And what's the one question you really wanted to get asked? And tell us what those are, and then we'll give you a chance to answer it.
What I didn't want to get asked, I think, was one of the questions that I was asked on Thursday that I felt unprepared for, and that was sort of to paraphrase, you know, what specific things related to environmental sustainability, what specific ideas do you have? What would you be looking to advance? And I'm not answering that today because I gave you an answer on Thursday. That I was really, you know, the role of the town manager is, you know, with respect to the community, I'm responsible for implementing your goals, right? I'm not responsible for implementing my goals or what I think is the best. And so I really was not feeling like I am the expert in all matters climate to be putting forth what I think the solution to the problem is, or several solutions. So that's what I was hoping not to get asked. I don't know, what did I feel like I was asked a lot of good questions, and ones that I did feel prepared to answer, and the same today, so I'm not sure what I...
Well, I guess with this sustainability question, and asking that question, you've answered it correctly, in the sense of the way you see the role of the town manager, but I think what we look for there is something like, this is important, and I'm going to drive
Right.
the organization to help the town accomplish its goals. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you sort of addressed it appropriately. So what other questions do we have for
I have
Kerry? Susan?
one. It's, I don't know what category to put it in, but it's economic, and how well do you, how would you prepare for another unseen event like a depression, economic depression? And how, well, you could speak to it particularly because you're in the position, how prepared are we as fiscally to deal with that? I know it depends on the degree and all that, but it seems like it's not an if, it's a when, who knows, but there'll be another correction at some point.
So it's something that I'm definitely concerned about because we've been on the rebound, whether people feel it or not, for a very long time. In our community, where our tax base is mostly residential, and property taxes, the tax rate is relatively low, but the average and median tax bills are relatively high. I think we've had a lot of growth in the organization from a budget perspective that people have been willing to bear, partially because the economy is good, and I think partially because we have unused levy capacity, and so we're not going to the voters. We don't have to go to the voters. Fiscal 20 is a big growth year in terms of budget. And I would say, all things being equal, we've got about another 1.5 to 2 years of that type of growth before we're going to the voters asking for an override. And I think we might see a different result than what we expect, because you have town meeting, and we had a great attendance at town meeting this year, but it's, about 1,000 people in a community much larger than that. And I know you don't always have great voter turnout, but I bet if the economy is not doing well and we're looking for an override, we'll probably have a good voter turnout. So I think in the short term, we need to be taking a hard look at the budget. I guess one thing I didn't mention here is zero-based budgeting, which is something I'm very interested in. The school did it with, I think, very good results. I'd like to do that here, and I don't expect that everybody's going to be cheering about that. But I think partly to get a better understanding of the budget and the constraints and the opportunities, it's important, but I think it's equally important to be taking that hard look to position ourselves for the inevitable. Because when the economy goes south, whenever it's going to go, I don't want to be going to the voters at that point in time and saying, you know what, we need an override. I've worked in communities that have passed overrides each year for a number of years. Even when that happens, it's hard. You're putting 2 budgets together. You may be having 2 town meetings. It's a lot of unnecessary time and effort and expense, and I don't want to do that. So I think taking a hard look at the budget and figuring out how can we do what we're doing better, more efficiently, more cost-effective, so that we're in a better position for the next recession.
Thank you.
Sort of keying off of that, but also coming back to some of the other systems responses. You referenced the schools had just gone through a zero-based budgeting. As town manager, you would be responsible for not just the budget, but the operations of the town.
Mm-hmm.
We both as a community and as, I think is echoed in some of the goals of the Envision Concord documents, having this larger conversation that doesn't silo between schools and town, but looking at budgets as a whole, because it's one tax base.
Yeah.
How would you improve the cross-department conversations, working with the schools, so that, as you said, the override isn't a surprise, nor is it a last resort. It's where if it happens with eyes wide open, and it doesn't get triggered by the schools versus the town, or the town versus the schools.
Yeah. So the way that I have approached this in the past, again, in the town of Lunenburg, I would prepare a 5-year forecast that was presented at a meeting of the select board, the finance committee, and the school committee in advance of the budget process. And we would go through that 5-year forecast. We talk about the assumptions, get some general agreement on the assumptions, and that would identify what we expected to have available for resources. I would then put together a target budget for both the town and the schools in terms of overall level of spending. For the schools, not anything more detailed than, based on this forecast, you have $30 million. That's what I see is available. And then engage in a conversation with the superintendent. Okay, how is that going to impact what you're doing in carrying out your mission? And I would do that rather than get so far down in the budget process where if I step back, the best time to solve a problem is when you don't have a problem in front of you, right? Anytime the problem is in front of you, all you're thinking about are the particular elements of that problem. You're not looking at the global, from a global perspective. And so that's why I would approach this before we get into the nitty-gritty of how this is going to impact, the foreign language program. Let's just talk about this overall. And from those conversations, sometimes there were adjustments that were made in the forecast and in the target budget. And I think that's the best way that I can answer how we went into that. I think I had a great working relationship with the superintendent. I've worked places where there's a lot of tension between the town manager and the superintendent, so I know that exists. I can't work in that environment. I couldn't be a part of perpetuating that environment, and so I would just be doing my best to continue working to understand how are these constraints impacting you, and what can we do, and okay, maybe you need a little more this year, but you have to understand I'm going to need a little more next year, and can we look at things from not just one budget cycle to a budget cycle, but over a multitude of years. So I guess another thing that was interesting to me coming here is the fact that we don't really do a 5-year forecast. We do, at the end of the process, the finance committee and my office, we're working with the finance committee. But we do that at the end of the process, putting together a forecast of property taxes based on a lot of different assumptions. But that needs to be done up front. Perhaps that was the intent of, I know in years past there was a meeting in September where we had the school committees, we had the select board, the finance committee, the town of Carlisle involved. The first year I was here, we did that meeting, and we haven't done it for a variety of reasons since. Maybe that was the intent. But if it wasn't the intent, I think it needs to be at least part of the intent of that meeting, so people understand as you're putting your budget together, these are the constraints as we see them now. Please don't come to us at the end of the process with something that looks entirely different than what we've talked about up front.
Well, that's a big challenge, isn't it? We've got this appetite
It is, but-
for really exciting things coming out of our long-range plan and real need for capital planning and attention to sustainability. And on the other hand, we're coming near the end of our unused levy capacity and looking at significant capital expenditures over, and you still want this job, huh?
Absolutely. If there weren't any challenges, I don't think that any of the three candidates you have coming today would want to be here.
Well, that actually brings up a question that you may have articulated in earlier interviews, but while you describe that the role of the town manager is implementing the town's goals, a strong town manager system also implies that the town manager has passions and goals of their own. What is it that you want? What is an area of town government that you're most passionate about?
I think
Or opportunity?
what I want is the systems approach to problem solving. I think that is the answer to everything, or everything that we're facing from an internal perspective, where people are far less enthused about working in municipal government. The challenges are probably greater than they've ever been, and we're bringing things in. I mean, 30 years ago when I started, we certainly weren't making we weren't talking about climate action in local government, right? That was, okay, if somebody was talking about it, it was a federal government issue, it wasn't a local government issue. So I think that's what I'm most passionate about, is changing the way that we do what we do through this systems approach, where every time we have an issue in front of us, we are looking at what are the 6 or however many lenses that we need to bring this idea through in order to make the best decision.
Do you have any particular ideas about using the systems approach, say, for example, about economic vitality in the business centers, or maybe using the light plant as a way to work on sustainability? Do you have any ideas on those areas?
Okay, this is the question I didn't want to be asked.
Uh-oh.
May I revise? Do I have any ideas on...
Like your honesty.
I don't know that I have any more to add right now other than what I've been talking about, and I apologize for that. I wish I did, but I'm not sure that I do.
I'd like to frame it a little bit differently. It might be that you could answer this part. With the systems approach, you've talked about it internally in terms of, but what Terry was talking about with other constituencies, would that involve including them as well in this systems approach for businesses, or the items that Terry mentioned?
Yeah.
It would, it would could involve more than just municipal problem solvers.
Yeah. So I guess in that light, the systems approach, I'm talking about changing the internal organization. And it definitely would make sense to bring in people from the outside. Like, how are you experiencing what we're doing? And how could we better help? Because we do the citizen survey every other year, and for the people that participate, you know, I think we get a very good response in terms of the number of people that participate, but we're, you know, it's a small group, and the people that are responding are pretty happy, and it's nice to hear, but that's not the whole story. And so I think we need to be hearing from a broader range, and I'm not sure how we do that, but, you know, maybe we're calling people, you know, maybe as a part of that survey, we're actually, and not me or my staff, but we have a consultant who is calling people and asking, would you take this survey as somebody who didn't participate, and hear from them. And I think those responses might be different than what we're receiving, and might point us to directions on, you know, areas of improvement that we didn't necessarily see. So I do think it's important to involve people from the outside, because we're here to serve the community, and we want to make sure that we're serving people in the best way. And we don't necessarily know. You know, we hear from the people who are really happy and the people who are really unhappy. But we're not hearing from the people who are, you know, it's okay, but maybe it could be better. And we need to know how they think it could be better.
Please.
I'm going to move to a different area. I'm interested in if you can give an example of a significant legal issue that you've had to navigate, what the outcome of that was, and what was your assessment of the short and long-term impact of that issue.
So again, in the town of Lunenburg, we had a development-related lawsuit that spanned over, and we had two of them. So one in particular was related to a 40B development. And as you know, when a developer comes in, if you haven't met your 10%, they have free range to do a number of different things. So we had a developer who was coming in, 40B, a traditional 40B. The town had not met its requirements, so we were subject to this. It went through the zoning process. The ZBA turned it down. They went to the state. It was approved. They immediately wanted to start developing. This development was going to occur in an area of town, a difficult area of town from a utilities perspective, because the town of Lunenburg receives its sewer service both from contracts with the city of Leominster and the city of Fitchburg. And so this development happened to be in an area of town where it was fairly easy to get sewer service from either of those communities, but according to the IMA, it was supposed to go to one, and of course it wanted to go to the other because it would be more cost effective. And one of the provisions, the connection fees, the fees, they were different between the two different IMAs because of, you know, what was going on in each of the communities where they were relative towards their own infrastructure. So there was a lawsuit that was multifaceted, but one of the issues had to do with where the sewer service was going to come from and the connection fees, and under the decision from the state, the town was actually going to be responsible for paying some of those fees that the developer should have paid. So there was a protracted lawsuit that spanned a number of years, and the financial impact, both in terms of defending the suit and the outcome of the suit, were huge to the community. That suit actually didn't settle while I was there, but I understand it has settled since. I think, and unfortunately, I think I've lost track of what you wanted me to answer.
Well, can you speak to what your role specifically was in that protracted?
Yeah, and so my role with regard to the sewer issue in particular was working with our sewer commission, and our sewer commission was an elected body, and working with representatives of the two cities to first decide, okay, which entity are they going to get their sewer service from, and trying to negotiate a better deal for the town in the event that the town was going to be responsible for paying for those connection fees. And as a result, we ended up renegotiating our intermunicipal agreement, because there were things that the city that we were working with hoped to achieve through the next renegotiation that was years out, but we were able to open up the agreement and renegotiate aspects of it to benefit both communities.
Thank you.
Kerry, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate your time on Thursday and today, and for your interest in this position. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
Thank you. We will take a 5-minute break and reconvene back here to interview our second candidate.
All right.